Did you really just spill champagne on a $5,000 dress? The question came from a sharp voice behind me, laced with judgment and dripping with Miami's signature flair for drama. I spun around, clutching the empty flute in my hand, and came face to face with a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a reality TV show. Perfectly bronzed skin, impossibly high heels, and an aura of practiced intimidation. "Sorry," I stammered, my cheeks burning. "It was an accident." Her eyes narrowed, and for a second I thought she might bite back, but then her gaze shifted. Her lips curled into a smirk, and she stepped closer. Well, she purred, her voice lower now, almost amused. "He's watching you." "What?" I blinked, following her line of sight, and then I saw him. Standing near the edge of the yacht, a glass in hand, his tailored suit impossibly crisp even in the humid Miami night, was Julian Novak. My breath caught, the air feeling suddenly heavier. It had been years since I'd seen him, years since the night he disappeared from my life without explanation. "Who's that?" my best friend Nadia whispered, suddenly at my side. Her dark curls bounced as she leaned in, her eyes following mine. "Julian," I said quietly, barely able to get the word out. "We used to know each other." "Know each other?" Nadia's eyes lit up. "Oh my God, that's the Julian! The mysterious, rich, devastatingly gorgeous." "Yes! That one," I hissed, my stomach churning. Julian's gaze met mine, and for a split second, the world tilted. He froze, recognition flashing in his eyes. Before either of us could move, a deafening crash reverberated through the yacht. The deck shook violently, sending champagne glasses shattering to the floor. Guests screamed, gripping railings as the yacht listed sharply to one side. "What the hell was that?" Nadia yelled, her knuckles white as she clutched my arm. And then, through the chaos, I saw something I couldn't believe. Julian rushing toward me, his face pale. "We need to talk. Now," he said, his voice urgent. "You're in danger." "What do you mean I'm in danger?" I asked, my voice rising above the panicked murmurs around us. The yacht creaked ominously as it steadied, but the tension in the air was electric, like we were waiting for the other shoe to drop. Julian grabbed my wrist, his grip firm but not painful. "This isn't the place to explain," he said, his eyes darting to the clusters of frightened partygoers. "Just trust me." Trust him? The man who ghosted me years ago without so much as a goodbye? My heart screamed no, but the way his eyes bore into mine, wild with something I couldn't quite name, fear, maybe desperation, made me hesitate. "Lily," Nadia said, her voice trembling, "what's going on? Who is this guy?" Before I could respond, a low voice crackled over the yacht's speaker system. It was calm, calculated, and instantly chilling. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice began, "apologies for the interruption. Unfortunately, this is no ordinary party. You're all going to need to cooperate if you want to get off this yacht alive." Gasps erupted around us. My heart slammed against my ribs as I scanned the crowd, searching for the source of the voice. Security guards were rushing to the edges of the deck, but even they looked uncertain, their hands hovering near their earpieces. "What's happening?" Nadia whispered, her hand clutching my arm tightly. Julian leaned in close, his voice urgent. "You need to stay with me, Lily. They're here because of me." "What?" My head spun. "What do you mean, because of you? What the hell is going on?" Before he could answer, the voice returned, colder this time. "Julian Novak," it said, and the crowd turned to him as if pulled by an invisible string. "You thought you could hide, didn't you? Thought you could run from the mess you made, but now it's time to pay the price." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Julian's jaw tightened and he looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Lily," he said quietly, "I've got a lot to explain, but first we need to get off this yacht." "What do you mean we need to get off this yacht?" I hissed, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the panicked voices around us. "What mess did you make? Who's after you?" Julian's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe. "I'll explain everything, I promise, but right now I need you to trust me. Staying here isn't safe." "Not safe?" Nadia interjected, her voice sharp. "We're on a yacht in the middle of the ocean. Where exactly do you think we're going?" Before Julian could answer, the voice on the speakers cut through the chaos again. "Tick-tock, Mr. Novak. You have 5 minutes to reveal yourself, or things are going to get unpleasant for everyone on board." The crowd erupted into chaos. Some guests screamed, while others began arguing with the security guards, demanding answers. One man in a white blazer threw his champagne glass overboard in a fit of panic, as if that would somehow help. "Julian," I said, grabbing his arm. "If they're after you, why drag me into this? What's going on?" He looked down at me, his expression softening for just a moment. "Because they're not just after me, Lily. They're after you too." I froze, the weight of his words hitting me like a tidal wave. "Me? Why would they care about me?" "Because of what you saw that night," he said, his voice low. "What night?" I demanded, but my memory was already racing, sifting through the fragments of the past, and then it hit me. The gala. Years ago. The night Julian vanished. The shady men in suits arguing in hushed tones, the sound of something breaking, Julian pulling me away and insisting we leave before dessert. I thought it was nothing, just a weird coincidence. "You mean—" "Yes," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "You saw something you weren't supposed to, and now they think you're a loose end." Nadia's eyes widened, her hand clutching mine. "What the hell, Lily?" Julian tightened his grip on my wrist. "We don't have time for this. Come with me now, or none of us are making it out alive." I hesitated for a heartbeat, my mind racing. Could I trust him? Could I even trust myself to make the right decision? But the panic in Julian's voice, the way his grip tightened protectively on my wrist, left little room for debate. "Fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Lead the way." "Lily," Nadia protested, but I grabbed her hand. "You're coming too," I said firmly, not giving her a choice. Julian nodded and began weaving through the panicked crowd, pulling us along. The yacht was a maze of opulence. White leather seating, marble countertops, gold accents on every surface. But in that moment, it felt like a prison. "Where are we even going?" Nadia hissed, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she struggled to keep up. "There's a service hatch near the stern," Julian said without looking back. "It leads to the lifeboats. We'll take one and get out of here before things escalate." "Escalate?" I snapped. "How much worse can this get?" Julian didn't answer, which wasn't exactly comforting. We reached the lower deck, the crowd thinning as most guests stayed clustered near the bar and the main lounge. The sound of the ocean grew louder, the waves crashing against the hull, a stark reminder of how isolated we were. Just as we turned a corner, two men in black suits appeared ahead of us, their expressions cold and calculating. "There he is," one of them said, his voice low and menacing. Julian stopped abruptly, his body tense. "Stay behind me," he whispered. "Julian Novak," the other man said, his hands slipping inside his jacket. "Time's up." Before I could fully process what was happening, Julian lunged forward, shoving one of the men into the wall. The other reached for something, likely a weapon, but Julian was faster, twisting his arm and disarming him with shocking precision. "Go!" Julian barked, looking over his shoulder at us. Grabbing Nadia's hand, I ran, my heart hammering as the sound of scuffling and grunts echoed behind us. "This is insane!" Nadia cried. "You think I don't know that?" I shot back, adrenaline coursing through me as we raced toward the stern. We burst onto the stern deck, the cool ocean air slamming into us like a shock to the system. The night sky stretched above us, speckled with stars, a cruel contrast to the chaos unravelling on the yacht. "Where's the lifeboat?" I panted, scanning the edge of the deck. Julian appeared moments later, his shirt rumpled and a streak of blood on his cheek. "Over here," he said, motioning to a small, sleek lifeboat secured by ropes. "What happened to those guys?" Nadia asked, her voice high-pitched and trembling. "They're not a problem for now," Julian said, his voice clipped. "But we don't have much time before more show up. Get in." Nadia froze, staring at the tiny lifeboat like it was a death sentence. "Are you kidding me? That thing barely looks seaworthy." "It's this or stay here and hope they don't start shooting," Julian snapped, already working to lower the boat into the water. I grabbed Nadia's arm. "We have to go. Now." Reluctantly, she climbed in, muttering curses under her breath. I followed, my heart pounding as Julian secured the ropes. He climbed in last, cutting the lines with a pocket knife and letting the boat drop into the dark waves below. The lifeboat rocked violently as it hit the water, the cold spray soaking my legs. Julian immediately moved to the small engine at the back, yanking the cord until it sputtered to life. "Where are we even going?" I asked, gripping the sides of the boat as the yacht grew smaller behind us. "There's a marina a few miles from here," Julian said, his voice steady despite the situation. "We'll head there and figure out the next step." Nadia glared at him. Oh, great! Figure it out! That's comforting. Would you rather stay on the yacht with the hitman? Julian shot back, his tone sharp. Before she could answer, a loud explosion ripped through the air. We all turned, our heads snapping toward the yacht. A ball of fire erupted from its upper deck, illuminating the night like a second sun. Nadia gasped. Oh my God, what just happened? Julian's jaw tightened. They're sending a message. They want us to know they're serious. And suddenly, the open water didn't feel so safe anymore. The fiery glow of the yacht reflected off the dark waves, painting the night with a surreal, hellish hue. For a moment, none of us spoke, the reality of the explosion sinking in. My ears were still ringing, but my mind screamed one thing loud and clear. Whoever was after Julian, and now us, wasn't playing games. Nadia broke the silence, her voice trembling. This is insane! They just blew up a yacht! A yacht, Julian! What did you drag us into? Julian kept his eyes forward, his hands steady on the lifeboat's controls. I didn't drag anyone into this, he said, his tone calm but edged with guilt. I tried to handle it alone. They're the ones who escalated. Escalated? I snapped, my voice rising. You've been vague and cryptic this whole time, Julian. We're in the middle of nowhere, running from God knows who, and you still haven't told me why they're after us. He exhaled sharply, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the throttle. It's not something I wanted you involved in, Lily. Well, too late, I yelled, throwing my arms in the air. So either you start talking, or I'm jumping overboard and taking my chances with the sharks. Nadia shot me a look. Sharks? Seriously, not helping. Julian slowed the boat, the engine humming softly as he finally met my gaze. His blue eyes, once a source of comfort, now seemed haunted. Years ago, I got involved in something I shouldn't have, he began. A business deal with dangerous people. At first it seemed harmless, just investments, quick money, but it wasn't. They were laundering funds, trafficking weapons, things I couldn't unsee once I realised. My stomach churned. And the gala? They thought you overheard something critical that night, Julian said, his voice heavy. They've been watching me ever since, waiting for leverage. When I showed up tonight, I didn't expect you to be here. Nadia's voice was sharp. So now they think we're involved too. Julian nodded grimly, which is why I need to keep you both safe, no matter what it takes. Safe? I repeated, my voice shaking. Julian, they just blew up a yacht. What's their idea of not safe? As if in answer, a faint, ominous light appeared on the horizon, growing closer, another boat. The faint light on the horizon grew brighter with each passing second, slicing through the darkness like a predator zeroing in on its prey. My pulse thundered in my ears as I realised what it meant. They're coming, I whispered, my throat dry. Julian's jaw tightened and he spun the throttle, sending our lifeboat surging forward into the choppy waves. The engine whined in protest, but he didn't let up. Hold on, he said sharply. Hold on to what? Nadia screeched, gripping the edge of the boat as it lurched violently. They're not going to stop, Julian said, his voice grim, but they'll want to catch us alive. That gives us an edge. Some edge, I muttered, but I clung to the boat, my knuckles white. Behind us, the pursuing vessel was closing in fast. Its sleek black hull looked like a shadow against the fire-lit horizon, but its speed was undeniable. The sound of its engine roared over the crashing waves, growing louder with every passing second. What's the plan, Julian? I demanded, panic creeping into my voice. He didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the dark water like he was searching for something. Finally, he pointed to a faint outline ahead, a strip of jagged coastline, barely visible in the moonlight. We head for the shoreline, he said. The rocks will slow them down. If we're lucky, we'll lose them there. If we're lucky? Nadia echoed, her voice breaking. That's your plan? Rocks! It's better than getting caught! Julian snapped. As we raced toward the shoreline, the pursuing boat fired a warning shot, a sharp crack that echoed across the water, followed by a splash just feet from our lifeboat. They're shooting at us! Nadia shrieked, ducking instinctively. They're trying to scare us, Julian said, though his tight grip on the controls betrayed his nerves. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Julian, I shouted, my voice raw. I see it, he barked, steering the boat sharply to the left as the shoreline loomed closer. The waves grew rougher, crashing against the jagged rocks ahead. Brace yourselves, Julian yelled. This is going to get rough. The lifeboat hit the first wave near the rocky shoreline with a force that nearly sent me flying. Nadia screamed, clutching my arm as the boat careened to the side. Julian gritted his teeth, fighting the controls as the choppy water tossed us like a toy in a bathtub. Behind us, the larger boat was closing the gap, its spotlight sweeping the water until it landed on us. The beam was blinding, slicing through the darkness and illuminating Julian's grim face. "They're not slowing down!" I shouted, my voice almost lost in the roar of the waves. "They won't risk ramming us near the rocks," Julian said, his tone hard. "But if they get close enough, they'll try to board us." "Fantastic," Nadia muttered, her face pale. The rocky shoreline loomed ahead, jagged and unforgiving. Julian angled the lifeboat sharply, weaving dangerously close to the rocks. The larger boat hesitated, its pilot pulling back slightly to avoid tearing their hull on the treacherous terrain. "See?" Julian said, glancing back at us. "This is working." A deafening crack split the air, and suddenly the boat jerked violently. The engine sputtered, then died, leaving us adrift in the surging waves. "What was that?" Nadia cried, panic etched across her face. "They hit the engine," Julian growled, crouching to examine the damage. "We're dead in the water." The larger boat was inching closer, its spotlight fixed on us like a predator preparing to strike. "Now what?" I demanded, gripping the side of the lifeboat. Julian straightened, his jaw set. "We swim." "Swim?" Nadia's voice cracked. "In this? Are you insane?" "It's either that or let them catch us," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Where do we even go?" I asked, my heart racing. Julian pointed to a narrow gap in the rocks, where the water churned violently but seemed to lead to a small cove beyond. "Through there. It's risky, but it's our only shot." I glanced at Nadia, her face a mix of fear and disbelief. "You ready?" "No," she said, trembling, "but let's do it anyway." And with that, we plunged into the icy water. The icy water hit me like a slap, stealing the air from my lungs and making my muscles lock up for a split second. Waves crashed around us, pulling and pushing as if they were alive, trying to drag us under. "Lily! Nadia!" Julian's voice cut through the chaos. "Stay close to the rocks. Use them to guide you." I turned my head, coughing up salt water, and saw Julian already ahead, his strokes powerful and purposeful. Nadia was flailing beside me, her panic evident. "Nadia, I've got you!" I yelled, reaching for her arm. "I can't! This is insane!" she sputtered, her eyes wide with fear. "Yes, you can," I said firmly, gripping her hand and pulling her with me. "Just keep moving. We're almost there." Behind us, the larger boat slowed, its spotlight sweeping over the water like an ominous eye. Shouts echoed from the deck, and another shot rang out, splashing dangerously close. "They're shooting again!" Nadia cried, tears mixing with the seawater streaming down her face. "Keep swimming!" Julian shouted, his voice cutting through the roar of the waves. The gap in the rocks loomed closer, but the current grew stronger, pulling us toward the jagged edges. My arms burned, my legs felt like lead, but the sight of that narrow cove kept me moving. Julian reached the gap first, gripping a protruding rock and steadying himself as he looked back at us. "Hurry! I'll pull you through!" I pushed Nadia forward, ignoring the sharp sting of the salt water in my eyes. She grabbed Julian's outstretched hand and he yanked her into the calmer waters beyond the rocks. I was next, kicking furiously against the current as I reached for Julian's hand. His grip was strong, and with one final pull, I broke through the gap, collapsing into the cove. The water here was eerily calm, shielded by the jagged rocks surrounding it. I gasped for air, my chest heaving as I turned to look back. The larger boat had stopped just outside the gap, its spotlight scanning the rocks. They couldn't follow us. For now, we were safe. But Julian's tense expression said it wasn't over yet. The calm of the cove was deceptive, like a breath held in the eye of a storm. The shouts from the boat outside the rocks were muffled now, but I could still hear them. Orders barked, frustration palpable. They couldn't get through the narrow gap without risking their hull, but that didn't mean they were giving up. Julian sat on a jagged rock, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. His face was illuminated by the faint glow of moonlight, and for the first time I noticed the exhaustion in his eyes. He'd been running from this far longer than I had. "What now?" Nadia asked, her voice trembling as she wrung out her soaked hair. Julian looked up, his expression grim but focused. "We stay hidden until they give up and leave. Then we figure out how to get off this island." "Island?" I echoed, scanning our surroundings. The cove was surrounded by high cliffs, and beyond that, there were shadows of dense trees and uneven terrain. "We're on an island?" "Yes," Julian said, wiping water from his face. "One of the smaller, uninhabited ones. The rocks here make it hard for larger boats to approach, which is why it's our best shot. But we're not entirely out of danger yet." Nadia laughed bitterly, hugging her knees to her chest. "Not out of danger? Julian just swam through a death trap while being shot at. What's next? Cannibals." "They won't give up easily," he said, ignoring her sarcasm. "They'll circle the area, maybe send out smaller boats or even drones. We have to stay hidden until morning." I sat down beside him, my soaked clothes clinging to my skin. "Julian," I said quietly, "you keep saying we, but let's be honest, this isn't about us. They're after you. Why don't you just give yourself up and let them leave us alone?" His jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with something between anger and pain. "Because giving myself up won't save you, Lily. You know too much. You saw too much. They won't stop until both of us are silenced." The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So what do we do?" I whispered. Julian's gaze hardened. "We survive." The gravity of Julian's words hung heavy in the air. "We survive." It sounded simple, but the look in his eyes said otherwise. This wasn't just about hiding until morning. It was about staying one step ahead of people who wouldn't hesitate to kill us. Nadia broke the silence, her voice shaky but edged with defiance. "Okay, we survive. But how, Julian? We're soaking wet, stuck on some random island, and I didn't exactly pack a running-for-your-life kit." Julian stood, his sharp silhouette framed by the moonlight. "First, we find shelter. The cliffs and trees will shield us from their view, but we need to move farther inland in case they try anything overnight." "And then what?" I asked, standing reluctantly. My body ached from the swim, and every muscle screamed for rest. "Then we wait for an opening," he said. "They can't stay out there forever. Once they leave, we'll signal for help or find a way off this island." Nadia rolled her eyes, muttering, "Great plan, just wing it." "Do you have a better idea?" Julian snapped, his tone sharper than before. "Stop," I interjected, stepping between them. "Fighting isn't going to help. Let's just focus on getting somewhere safe, okay?" Julian's shoulders relaxed slightly and he nodded. "Follow me. Stay close and stay quiet." We climbed up the rocky incline leading away from the cove, the ground uneven and treacherous. My breath came in short gasps as we pushed through dense foliage, the rustling of leaves and occasional snap of a twig the only sounds. "Julian," I said after what felt like an eternity, "why did you come to that party? You had to know it was risky." He paused, turning to look at me. His face was unreadable, but his voice softened. "I didn't know you'd be there. That doesn't answer my question." He hesitated, then sighed. "I came because I thought I could negotiate with them, end this once and for all. But seeing you there, it changed everything. I couldn't risk them using you as leverage." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling in my chest. "Lily," he said, his voice quiet, "I made mistakes, but protecting you isn't one of them." Before I could respond, a faint buzzing sound cut through the stillness. Nadia froze. "What's that?" Julian's face darkened. "A drone." The faint buzz of the drone grew louder, its high-pitched hum slicing through the stillness like a warning. My stomach dropped as Julian's expression shifted from determination to urgency. "Get down," he whispered harshly, motioning for Nadia and me to drop to the ground. We crouched low, pressing ourselves into the dirt and foliage, the dampness of the earth clinging to my already soaked clothes. The moonlight barely pierced through the canopy of trees above, casting fragmented shadows that danced eerily across the ground. Julian scanned the treetops, his body tense. "Stay perfectly still," he murmured. "The thermal cameras can pick up movement." Thermal cameras. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just a search, they were hunting us with precision. Nadia's breathing was ragged, and I reached out to grab her hand, squeezing it to steady her. "We'll be okay," I mouthed, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. The drone hovered closer, the sound deafening now, like a mechanical wasp circling its prey. I felt the vibration in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to run, but Julian's presence grounded me. "Hold," he whispered, his eyes locked on the sky. The drone's spotlight flicked on, a piercing beam that sliced through the trees, illuminating patches of the forest floor. It swept across the undergrowth, moving methodically, searching. My heart pounded as the light passed just inches from where we lay. I held my breath, my body rigid, praying the leaves and shadows were enough to conceal us. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the drone's light moved on. The buzzing began to fade, retreating toward the shoreline. Julian exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing ever so slightly. They're scanning the perimeter. We need to move now while it's circling away. Nadia looked at him, wide-eyed. Are you serious? What if it comes back? It will, Julian said, pulling me to my feet. But we have to reach higher ground. If we're caught in another sweep, we're finished. I nodded, adrenaline surging through me as we began to climb. Every step felt heavier, every sound sharper. Julian, I whispered, glancing over my shoulder, what happens if they find us? His answer was chilling. They won't take us alive. The weight of Julian's words sent a chill through my entire body. They wouldn't take us alive. The reality of our situation sank deeper, but I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. We kept climbing, pushing through the dense brush as the buzzing of the drone faded into the distance. We can't keep doing this, Nadia hissed, her voice trembling. We can't outrun them forever. We won't have to, Julian said, without looking back. If we get high enough, we'll have the advantage. The drones can't maneuver well in dense foliage or near cliffs. We just need to make it a little farther. Julian, your optimism is exhausting, Nadia muttered, though she didn't stop moving. The climb became steeper, the ground uneven and littered with loose stones that threatened to send us tumbling. My legs burned and my lungs screamed for air, but I refused to stop. The thought of that drone's light locking onto us was enough to keep me moving. Finally, we emerged onto a rocky ledge. Below, the coastline stretched out, illuminated faintly by the moonlight. From this vantage point, I could see the dark silhouette of the larger boat still circling the waters near the cove. They're still looking, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. They will be for a while, Julian replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. But this gives us time to think. Nadia slumped against a rock, her face pale. Think? Think about what? We're on a deserted island with no food, no water, and people trying to kill us. What exactly do you suggest we think about? Signals, Julian said. We need to find a way to signal for help, or at least distract them long enough to create an opening. I looked at him, my frustration bubbling to the surface. Signal to who, Julian? It's not like there's a rescue team on standby. There might be, he said, his tone steady. If I can access their communication frequencies, I can jam them and send a distress signal to the Coast Guard. Nadia blinked. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Magic? Julian smirked faintly and pulled a small weathered device from his pocket. No magic, just preparation. I stared at him, stunned. You had this the whole time? He shrugged. Like I said, I've been ready for this. Julian held up the small weathered device, its exterior scratched but clearly functional. It looked like a cross between a walkie-talkie and something cobbled together in a garage workshop. You've been carrying around a signal jammer? I asked, incredulous. Not just a jammer, Julian corrected, kneeling to set the device on the rocky ground. It can block their communications and send out a distress signal on emergency channels. Coast Guard frequencies, to be specific. Wait, Nadia interjected, raising a hand like she was in class. So you're telling me this little thing is going to save us? Why didn't you use it earlier? Because once I activate it, Julian said, his tone serious, they'll know exactly where we are. It's not subtle. They'll come straight for us. My stomach sank. So it's a gamble. Everything about this is a gamble, Julian admitted, his voice low but resolute. But if I can jam their comms and get a distress signal out, we might have a chance. It'll bring help, or at least buy us time to escape. Nadia let out a nervous laugh, shaking her head. Oh, great. So plan A is to poke the hornet's nest and hope someone notices? It's better than waiting to get caught, Julian shot back, his hands already working to adjust the dials on the device. I crouched beside him, the tension in the air making it hard to breathe. How long will it take for the signal to reach someone? Minutes, maybe less. Julian said, but we'll need to be ready to move the second I turn it on. They'll come hard and fast once they realise what's happening. Move where? Nadia demanded, her voice breaking. Toward the cliffs, Julian said. There's a narrow ridge that leads to a hidden cave. It'll give us cover until help arrives, or until we figure out our next move. I swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. You really think this will work? Julian looked at me, his blue eyes steady and filled with something I hadn't seen in years, unshakable conviction. It has to, he said simply, and then he flipped the switch. The device crackled to life, emitting a low hum that seemed to echo in the still night. Somewhere in the distance, the drone's buzz suddenly stopped. They'll know, Julian said, standing. We run now. The moment Julian flipped the switch, the tension shifted from oppressive silence to an electric urgency. The drone's hum vanished, leaving the eerie quiet of the night broken only by the crash of waves against the cliffs. They'll know, Julian repeated, his voice sharp and unyielding. We need to move. Now. Great, Nadia muttered as she pushed herself off the rock, running toward cliffs in the dark. Love that for us. Better than staying here, I said, grabbing her arm and pulling her along as Julian led the way. The rocky terrain was unforgiving, every step a battle against loose stones and uneven ground. My legs ached, but adrenaline kept me going. The thought of those men bearing down on us was enough to drown out the pain. Julian, I called out between breaths. How far is this ridge? Not far, he replied, his voice steady despite the urgency. Just stay close and watch your footing. Behind us, a faint light flickered in the distance. The larger boat had stopped circling and was now shining spotlights toward the cliffs. They're on to us, Nadia hissed, her panic creeping into her voice. Let them be, Julian said, his tone grim. They can't reach us without scaling these rocks, and that'll slow them down. Unless they have more drones, I pointed out, my gaze flicking to the sky. They'll want to confirm we're here first, Julian said. The jammer will keep them guessing for a while. The ridge came into view, a narrow, treacherous path hugging the cliffside, barely wide enough for one person. Below, the dark ocean churned violently, its roar growing louder as waves crashed against the jagged rocks. You've got to be kidding me, Nadia groaned, staring at the precarious path. It's the only way, Julian said, already stepping onto the ridge. He moved with calculated precision, his steps steady despite the narrow ledge. I followed, my breath catching every time my foot slipped slightly on the loose gravel. Nadia trailed behind me, muttering a steady stream of curses under her breath. We were halfway across when the spotlight suddenly swept over us. They found us! Nadia screamed, gripping the rock wall as the light froze on our small group. Julian spun around, his voice sharp and commanding. Don't stop, keep moving. And then, behind the blinding spotlight, came the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. The gunshot cracked through the air like thunder, and I instinctively ducked, pressing myself against the jagged cliffside. My heart raced as chunks of rock splintered near my feet, kicked loose by the impact. They're shooting at us! Nadia cried, her voice shrill with panic. Keep moving! Julian shouted over the chaos, his voice firm and unrelenting. He was already a few steps ahead, one hand gripping the rock face for balance as he pushed forward along the narrow ridge. Nadia froze behind me, clutching the cliff with trembling hands. I can't! Oh my God, I can't! You can! I yelled back, grabbing her wrist. Look at me, Nadia, one step at a time. Don't stop. Another gunshot rang out, the sound reverberating off the rocks. This one hit farther away, but it was enough to send my adrenaline surging. Nadia, move! Julian barked, his tone harsher now. If you stay there, you're a sitting duck. Her wide eyes locked onto mine, and I gave her a firm nod. We've got this, I said, though my voice shook. We're almost there. Gritting her teeth, Nadia began inching forward, her movements jerky but determined. I stayed close, my hand brushing against the cliffside as the ridge narrowed further. The spotlight from the boat swayed, momentarily losing us in the darkness. Julian took the opportunity to speed up, reaching the end of the ridge where the path widened into a rocky overhang. Here! He called, motioning for us to hurry. I pushed Nadia ahead of me, her breaths coming in ragged gasps as we stumbled onto the overhang. Julian was already scanning the area, his sharp eyes darting to a narrow opening in the cliff. There, he said, pointing to the crevice. The cave! Get inside! We scrambled toward the opening just as the spotlight found us again, and another shot rang out, this one hitting close enough to send shards of rock spraying into the air. Julian shoved me into the cave first, then Nadia, before diving in himself. The narrow entrance provided immediate cover, the gunfire muffled as we pressed ourselves into the dark, cool space. For a moment, all I could hear was the sound of our breathing, heavy and uneven, echoing off the cave walls. "Is this safe?" Nadia whispered, her voice trembling. "It's safer than out there," Julian said, his tone grim. "But it's not over yet." The cave was dark and damp, its walls slick with condensation and sharp-edged in places. The air was thick, carrying the faint tang of salt and something metallic that made my stomach churn. We huddled together near the entrance, straining to hear any sounds over the pounding of the waves below. Outside, the spotlight continued to sweep the cliffside, its glow occasionally illuminating the jagged rocks. The gunfire had stopped for now, but tension clung to the air like a storm waiting to break. "They'll figure out we're in here," Nadia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What then?" "We're cornered." "They don't know the layout of this cave," Julian said, his tone calm but firm. "It's a labyrinth. If they try to come in, they'll have to move carefully, and we'll use that to our advantage." "Advantage?" Nadia muttered, pulling her knees to her chest. "They have guns, Julian. We have what? Rocks." Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim tactical knife, the blade glinting faintly in the low light. "We have more than rocks," he said simply. Nadia groaned, burying her face in her hands. "Great. One knife versus trained killers. Fantastic odds." "Stop," I said, cutting her off before her panic could spiral. "We've made it this far, and we're not giving up now. Julian knows what he's doing." Julian glanced at me, his expression softening for a brief moment. "We'll get through this," he said. "We just need to buy time." "Time for what?" Nadia asked, lifting her head. "For the distress signal to reach someone," he replied. "If the Coast Guard picks it up, they'll send a team to investigate. We just have to hold out until then." The cave fell silent again, the distant roar of the ocean filling the space. Then we heard it, footsteps crunching on the loose gravel outside. "They're here," Julian whispered, his hand tightening around the knife. I felt my pulse spike as the beam of the spotlight flickered past the cave entrance. Shadows danced on the walls, followed by muffled voices. "They're coming in," I whispered. "Stay behind me," Julian said, his voice low and steady. "No matter what happens." The footsteps grew louder, deliberate and menacing, echoing off the jagged walls of the cave. The faint murmur of voices outside turned into sharp commands, followed by the sound of boots crunching closer. My chest tightened as Julian pressed a finger to his lips, signaling for absolute silence. Then everything happened at once. A deafening explosion rocked the cave, the blast so powerful it sent chunks of rock raining down from the ceiling. The world became a blur of sound and motion as the cave shuddered violently, dust and debris filling the air. I screamed, clutching the wall for balance, my ears ringing. "They've blown the entrance!" Julian shouted, pulling me and Nadia farther into the darkness. Through the dust and chaos, I saw figures emerging, silhouetted by the glow of their flashlights. 3 men in tactical gear, guns drawn, their movements swift and precise. "Julian Novak!" one of them called, his voice cold and clipped. "It's over. There's no way out. Surrender now and we'll make it quick for your friends." Julian didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed something from his belt, a cylindrical device. My heart lurched when I realized what it was. "Is that—" I started, but Julian cut me off. "Flashbang," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Close your eyes and cover your ears. Now!" Without hesitation, I did as he said, pulling Nadia down with me. A second later, there was a brilliant burst of light and a concussive boom that left the men staggering, disoriented and shouting. "Go!" Julian barked, dragging us deeper into the cave. We sprinted through the twisting tunnels, the sound of the men recovering behind us, spurring us forward. Just as I thought we might be cornered, Julian skidded to a halt, his eyes locking onto a faint glimmer of light ahead. "There's another exit," he said, pointing to a narrow crack in the rock. We scrambled toward it, squeezing through just as shouts echoed from behind us. And then, outside the crack, a roar filled the air, not human but mechanical. A helicopter hovered just beyond the cliffs, its spotlight slicing through the darkness. "Who's that?" I gasped, staring in disbelief. Julian grinned, adrenaline lighting up his face. our ride. The roar of the helicopter grew deafening as its spotlight bathed the cliffside, illuminating our dishevelled forms and the chaos of the shattered cave entrance behind us. The downdraft from the spinning blades whipped my hair into my face, stinging my skin, but I couldn't look away. The sleek black helicopter hovered precariously close to the cliff's edge, and a figure leaned out of the open side door, strapped in with a harness. It was a woman, sharp-eyed, wearing tactical gear, and holding what looked like a rifle. She gestured furiously at us. "Move, Novak," she shouted over the noise. "We don't have time." "Who the hell is that?" Nadia yelled, clinging to me as the wind threatened to knock us over. "An old ally," Julian said with a smirk, already pulling us toward the helicopter. "Let's just say I have friends in high places." Shots rang out behind us, the crack of gunfire cutting through the whir of the blades. I turned to see the armed men from the cave scrambling over the rocks, their weapons aimed in our direction. "Julian!" I screamed, panic clawing at my throat. He spun around, his expression hardening. "Get to the chopper!" The woman in the helicopter opened fire, her shots precise, forcing the advancing men to scatter for cover. Julian shoved me toward the waiting helicopter, practically lifting Nadia and me into the open cabin as the pilot yelled, "We've got 30 seconds! Tops!" Julian climbed in last, just as a stray bullet ricocheted off the helicopter's frame. He slammed the door shut and shouted, "Go now!" The helicopter lurched upward, the cliffs falling away beneath us as it soared into the night. Below, the men on the ground fired helplessly, their shots swallowed by the roar of the rotors. I collapsed into a seat, my chest heaving as adrenaline coursed through me. "Who are these people?" I demanded, looking at Julian. "They're part of a group I worked with years ago," he said, wiping sweat and dirt from his face. "And the ones chasing us, they're not just criminals, they're part of something much bigger. This isn't over, Lily." Nadia groaned, burying her face in her hands. "Of course it's not." I stared out at the endless ocean below, my heart pounding. Whatever I'd stepped into, it was bigger than Julian, bigger than me, and it wasn't letting go. The hum of the helicopter filled the cabin as we hurtled away from the chaos below, the ocean shimmering faintly under the moonlight. My hands trembled, a mix of adrenaline and exhaustion leaving me jittery as I tried to process everything. Nadia was slumped in her seat, muttering to herself. A yacht explodes. We swim for our lives. We're shot at. And now we're in a helicopter with God knows who. This isn't real. This can't be real. I couldn't blame her. None of this felt real to me either. The woman in tactical gear turned to Julian, her rifle now slung over her shoulder. "You've got a lot of explaining to do, Novak. You said you'd lay low. Instead, you've got half the syndicate hunting you and civilians caught in the crossfire." "Nice to see you too, Elise," Julian said, his smirk faint but there. "Thanks for the timely rescue." "Don't thank me yet," Elise snapped, her sharp green eyes darting between Nadia and me. "Who are they?" Julian glanced at me, his expression softening for a moment. "Lily's someone I care about, and Nadia's her friend. They got caught in this because of me." "Caught in what?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. "Julian, you keep talking about this syndicate like it's some shadowy cabal from a movie. What are they? And why are they trying to kill us?" Elise raised an eyebrow. "You didn't tell Hella?" "I didn't exactly have the time," Julian said defensively. "Well, she deserves to know now," Elise said, folding her arms. "The syndicate isn't just a criminal organisation. It's a global network, arms dealers, traffickers, money launderers, all of it. And you, Julian, pissed off their leadership by exposing one of their operations." I stared at him, the weight of her words sinking in. "You exposed them? Why?" "Because I had to," Julian said quietly. "What I saw, what they were doing, was evil. People were dying, Lily. I couldn't look the other way." "Evil?" Nadia blurted, her voice high-pitched. "And now they're coming after us because you couldn't mind your own business?" Elise interrupted, her tone sharp. "They're not just coming after you. They're coming after everyone Julian cares about." I froze, her words cutting deeper than I expected. "So we're bait?" Julian's expression was grim. "You're not bait, you're leverage, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure they don't get their hands on you." The helicopter suddenly jolted, throwing us all against our seats. Elise grabbed a strap hanging from the ceiling to steady herself as the pilot yelled, "Incoming." "Incoming what?" I shouted, my voice barely audible over the roar of the rotors. Julian's face went pale. Missile! My heart stopped. A what? Before anyone could respond, the pilot banked the helicopter hard to the left, sending us into a stomach-churning spiral. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A small, glowing dot streaking toward us, growing brighter by the second. "They've got heat seekers!" Elise barked, slamming herself into the cockpit. "Deploy flares! Now!" The pilot's hands moved frantically over the controls, and a split second later, a series of bright flares burst from the helicopter's tail. The missile veered, narrowly missing us, but the shockwave rattled the cabin so violently I thought we might fall out of the sky. "Who the hell brings missiles to a manhunt?" Nadia screamed, clutching the armrest like it was her lifeline. "The Syndicate," Julian said grimly, pulling me closer to him as the helicopter levelled out. I was about to respond when the radio crackled. A distorted voice came through, calm but chilling. "Julian Novak," it said, smooth and deliberate. "You've run far enough. Hand over the device and we'll let your friends live. Keep running. You'll all die in the next 60 seconds. I stared at Julian, my stomach dropping. "What device?" Elise spun around, glaring at him. "Tell me you didn't." Julian hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black drive, no bigger than a pack of gum. Its edges glowed faintly blue, like it was pulsing with energy. "That's what they're after," Elise said, her voice laced with fury. "You stole it? Are you insane?" "They can't have it," Julian said, his jaw tight. "It's the Syndicate's entire network. Accounts, names, operations. If they get it back, it's over, for everyone." The radio crackled again. 30 seconds, Novak. Choose wisely." My mind raced. Hand it over and risk it all ending, or keep running and possibly die. "Julian," I whispered, "what do we do?" His eyes locked onto mine, fierce and unrelenting. "We jump." "Jump?" Nadia shrieked, her voice cracking. "Jump where? We're in the sky! Are you insane?" "Trust me," Julian said, already pulling a parachute pack from a compartment under his seat. "It's our only shot. They'll keep firing until this helicopter's nothing but smoke." Elise spun around, her eyes blazing. "You're making a death wish, Novak. We're still over open water." "There's an island ahead," Julian snapped. "I saw it on the approach. If we jump now, we'll make it." "They won't expect us to bail." The helicopter rocked violently again, and the distant glow of another missile streaking toward us appeared on the horizon. The radio crackled ominously. 10 seconds. Elise's jaw tightened, but she yanked open a storage compartment and pulled out 2 more parachutes, shoving them into my and Nadia's hands. "You'd better be right about this," she growled at Julian. "I usually am," Julian said with a smirk, strapping his own chute on. "Usually?" Nadia muttered, fumbling with the straps. "This is my actual nightmare." 5 seconds, the voice warned. "Out, now!" Julian yelled, throwing open the side door. The roar of the wind was deafening, the cold air slicing through me as I looked down at the churning black waves far below. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "I can't," Nadia whimpered, frozen in place. I grabbed her arm. "Yes, you can. It's this or stay here, and you know what happens if we stay." She stared at me, tears welling in her eyes, then nodded shakily. Okay. Julian leapt first, the glow of the missile now terrifyingly close. Elise pushed Nadia forward, practically shoving her out of the door. "Go!" Elise barked at me. I stepped to the edge, my breath catching as I looked down. Then, with one last glance at Elise, I jumped. The world fell away, wind whipping around me as I plunged toward the ocean. The helicopter exploded behind us, a blinding flash lighting up the sky. I yanked the cord, the chute snapping open above me as I drifted toward the dark island below. The sudden jerk of the parachute opening snapped me upward, the harness digging into my shoulders as I dangled in the cold night air. The explosion above illuminated the sky for a moment, casting everything in sharp, terrifying clarity. Fiery debris rained down into the ocean below, the wreckage of the helicopter a stark reminder of how close we'd come to death. "Lily, are you okay?" Julian's voice called out from somewhere above me. "I'm fine," I shouted, though my hands trembled as I clung to the straps. Below, the outline of an island grew larger, the waves crashing against its jagged shoreline. Nadia's scream pierced the air. I looked to my left to see her chute caught in a gust of wind, dragging her off course toward the trees on the far side of the island. "Nadia!" I yelled, panic surging through me. "I'm fine," she cried, though her voice wavered. Just don't let me die in the jungle, okay? Julian's voice cut through the wind. Aim for the clearing! We'll regroup on the beach! I shifted my weight, guiding the parachute toward the small patch of sand that Julian had spotted. My descent felt endless, the tension in my chest growing tighter with each passing second. Finally, I hit the ground, stumbling forward as the chute collapsed behind me. I unclipped the harness and turned to see Julian landing gracefully a few yards away. He jogged toward me, his face sharp with focus. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands gripping my arms as he looked me over. "I'm fine," I said, brushing him off. "But Nadia, she went toward the trees." Julian's jaw tightened. "We'll find her." Before we could move, a faint hum reached my ears, growing louder by the second. My stomach twisted as I turned to Julian. "They're coming, aren't they?" His expression darkened as he stared out over the horizon. Another boat was approaching, its lights cutting through the night. "They're not giving up," he said, pulling me toward the cover of the trees. "But neither are we." Julian grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the dense tree line at the edge of the beach. The sand slowed us down, but the faint hum of the approaching boat was like a whip at our backs, pushing us forward. "Nadia's out there somewhere," I said, breathless as I stumbled over a root. "We can't just leave her." "We won't," Julian said sharply, glancing over his shoulder. "But we need to stay out of sight first. If they catch us on the open beach, it's over." The trees swallowed us, the thick canopy blocking out the moonlight. My heart thundered as I tried to keep up with Julian's quick movements, the distant sound of the boat's engine growing louder. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a small clearing. Julian crouched low, motioning for me to do the same. "Stay here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What?" "No," I hissed. "You're not going out there alone. I need to find Nadia before they do," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You'll be safer here. Stay hidden, and if I don't come back—" "Don't," I snapped, grabbing his arm. "You will come back. Both of you." For a moment, his expression softened and his hand brushed mine. "I promise," he said. Then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows like a ghost. The jungle was alive with the sounds of insects and rustling leaves, but all I could focus on was the distant hum of the boat. My mind raced with 1,000 possibilities, each one worse than the last. Minutes dragged by, each second stretching into an eternity. Then a scream shattered the stillness. "Nadia!" I bolted upright, my instincts taking over as I ran toward the sound. I burst through the trees to find Julian struggling with one of the syndicate's men, their silhouettes locked in a violent grapple. Nadia was just beyond them, her foot caught in a tangle of vines as she tried desperately to free herself. "Run, Lily!" Julian yelled, his voice strained. "Get her and go!" But I didn't run. I grabbed the nearest rock I could find and charged, adrenaline roaring through me. I gripped the rock tightly, the rough edges biting into my palms as I rushed forward. Julian and the syndicate operative were locked in a fierce struggle, their movements frantic and desperate. My heart pounded, every instinct urging me to turn and flee, but I couldn't abandon him. Not now, not ever. The man had Julian pinned against a tree, one hand pressed against his chest while the other reached for something strapped to his side. Without hesitation, I swung the rock with every ounce of strength I had, connecting solidly with the side of his head. He staggered, his grip on Julian loosening as he stumbled to the ground. Julian didn't waste a second, delivering a precise, forceful shove that sent the man sprawling back. "Lily!" Julian called, grabbing my arm. "We need to go! Now!" I turned to see Nadia breaking free from a tangle of vines, her face pale but determined. She stumbled toward us, and Julian caught her, pulling her along as we ran. "Keep moving!" Julian urged, his voice sharp as beams of light began cutting through the dense trees behind us. The syndicate's reinforcements were closing in. Shouts echoed through the jungle, growing louder with every step. My legs burned and my lungs ached, but I didn't dare stop. The jungle suddenly opened into a rocky clearing, revealing a jagged cliff that dropped into the crashing waves below. My stomach twisted at the sight. We were out of options. "They're right behind us!" Nadia cried, clinging to my arm. Julian's gaze darted across the cliffside until he spotted it, a narrow path carved into the rock that led down to a hidden cove where a small fishing boat bobbed on the water. "There!" he shouted, pointing to the trail. "A boat!" I gasped. How is that even there? Does it matter? Julian shot back, already making his way toward it. We scrambled down the trail as shouts and flashlight beams grew closer. Julian reached the boat first, quickly untying it as Nadia and I climbed aboard. Just as the first beam of light swept over us, Julian pushed the boat off the rocks and leapt in. The engine roared to life and we sped into the dark ocean, leaving the chaos behind. For now, we were safe. But it wasn't over. The fishing boat cut through the waves, the roar of the engine fading into a steady hum as the island disappeared behind us. The night was quiet now, the distant chaos replaced by the soothing rhythm of the ocean. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. Nadia slumped against the side of the boat, her head tilted back, eyes closed. "Please tell me we're done running," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Julian, seated at the controls, glanced back at her with a faint smile. "We're done," he said, his tone softer than I'd ever heard it. "No more running. No more syndicate." I frowned, sceptical. "How can you be sure? They don't seem like the kind of people to just give up." Julian reached into his jacket and held up the sleek black drive, the one that had caused all this madness. "This," he said, "is going to make sure they do." Nadia opened one eye, sitting up slightly. "You're not keeping that thing, are you?" "No," Julian said, shaking his head. "I've already sent an encrypted signal to an agency I trust. They'll have the resources to dismantle the syndicate for good. Once we reach the mainland, this is out of my hands." I exhaled a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "So it's over?" Julian looked at me, his expression soft but resolute. "It's over, and you're safe." The relief washed over me in waves, bringing with it a warmth I hadn't felt in days. I leaned back, staring up at the stars as the boat glided across the water. "What now?" Nadia asked, her voice lighter. Julian grinned, a rare and genuine expression. "Now we start over. A new chapter. No syndicate, no running. Just freedom." I looked at him, my chest tightening, not with fear, but with hope. "And where do we go?" He turned to me, his blue eyes bright. "Anywhere we want." As the first rays of dawn lit up the horizon, I let the promise of a new beginning settle over me. For the first time, the future felt wide open, and ours to write.